Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of our podcast, Conversations with B'nai B'rith. I'm CEO Dan Mariaschin. If you enjoy the show, subscribe to Conversations with B'nai B'rith wherever you get your podcasts, and please rate us too. We always appreciate your feedback. And of course, you can also subscribe to our YouTube channel and like us on Facebook for all of our latest content. My guest today is Alberto Dorfzaun, B'nai B'rith member and president of Dorfzaun, the company behind the world-famous Panama Hat based in Cuenca, Ecuador. Dorfzaun was founded in 1939 by the first generation of the Dorfzaun family, which arrived in Ecuador, among the 3,000 to 4,000 Jews who fled there, escaping the horrors of World War II and the Holocaust. Famous for its history and quality, the Panama straw hat's traditional weaving became part of UNESCO'S lists of Intangible Cultural Heritage of Humanity in 2012 as an important world artifact. Alberto Dorfzaun is former president of the Jewish community in Quito, Ecuador, and a grandson of Holocaust refugees. As head of Dorfzaun, he has helped modernize the company, introducing new hat shapes to adjust to changing fashion trends and new manufacturing processes to make the hats more environmentally friendly. Alberto, welcome. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I have to say, we've hosted many different guests, from astronauts to ambassadors to innovators in various fields. I think this is the first time that we've interviewed a hat maker, and we're glad you're here. If you can, take us back to the life and the work of your family in Germany before Kristallnacht, or the November pogroms. Before fleeing Nazi Germany and arriving in the Americas, was your family involved in the hat business or the clothing industry? And what was it like having a business in Germany in the 1930s?
My family, my grandfather and his brothers had a business to take care of hair products. And they were quite successful in Munich, and they were developing products to dye the hair and basically hair products. And since they were living in Munich, they felt the Nazi movement early in the game. And they already in 1935, they started plans to leave Germany. Their initial reaction was to go to Palestine. My grandfather went to Palestine to look for how to settle there. And his wallet got stolen in Palestine, and he went to the British police and to claim that his wallet was stolen. And finally, nobody did anything. So he left Palestine saying, I don't want to be in a place where there's no police, and went back to Germany where there was too much police. And then they started wondering where to go. And in the same year, an uncle of mine, or great uncle of mine, had a Panama hat because he bought a motorcycle. So it occurred to them to come to Ecuador and to come to the Panama Hat business. That was really what started the connection between the family and the Panama Hats. And Ecuador at that time offered visas for people who worked in agriculture. And this, working in the Panama Hat business qualified, and they got a visa to come to Ecuador, and that's how they got here. With one hand and with really not much capital, they started the business. One of the uncles managed to go to New York. He settled there, so he was the one selling the hats, and his siblings were supplying them from Ecuador, and that's how the business started. And that's why we are in Ecuador, no other reason.
So when they arrived, there were other Jews coming out of Germany who were going to Ecuador. What businesses were they in? And I guess you were all in kind of the same boat in terms of being newcomers. Not everybody, I'm sure, had agricultural visas. Maybe they came for other reasons. Tell us about what that community was like at that time.
Most of the Jews came from Central Europe, mainly Germany and Czechoslovakia. And most of them got agricultural visas. And that's how they got here. And once they got here, they started working, a lot of them in agriculture. Most of them learned agriculture on the boat coming to Ecuador. and they started in agriculture, and soon they went off to do some commerce or industry, but most of the visas in Ecuador were in agriculture. The ones who came from the Czechoslovakia, Ecuador had a war with Peru in 1941, and Ecuador had bought weapons from Czechoslovakia, and they couldn't pay the debt. So they had a program which they swapped. The Czech Jews would deposit their crowns in Prague, and they will get their local currency here in Ecuador. And that's how the Czech Jews got the visas to get here. But most of them came on our cultural program.
Did most of your family get out? All of the family? Were there any who were left behind who perished in the Holocaust?
Many perished in the Holocaust. Many. And my father at that time, he was only 13 years old in 1938. And from my mother's side, it was a lot more difficult. She came out from Germany in 1941, from Germany to Spain, and from Spain to Cuba. And in Cuba, they were detained until the boat left. And basically, then they came to Colombia. So they had a lot tougher time getting out, always with the help of Jewish organizations, mainly the Joint and the Hayas.
What was it like coming from Middle Europe to Latin America? Totally different country, different surroundings, different weather, tropical diseases. How was the integration into life in Ecuador? Was it smooth?
The gap between first, it was love at first sight. Ecuador is still a very friendly country. They had all these exotic fruits, and everything was very cheap. And for them, since it was so underdeveloped, for them it was easy to adapt and to make a new living. So for most of them, they started working from the first day. Little language, but with a lot of work and hope and effort, most of them managed to do well. There was a program that the Hayas and the Joint established, a cooperative to lend money to the immigrants. And this was most of the seed capital that everybody got to start their businesses. And I would say most of them were very successful.
And when you started in the business, you were living in Quito, but the business was in Cuenca, correct?
That is correct. The reason the Panama hats are woven in Cuenca. Originally, the Panama hats were woven in the coast of Ecuador. And in the 1800s, there was a very big drought in Cuenca. And people had little income from agriculture because of the drought. And they taught people how to weave hats in the Cuenca region. And it really became the center where Panama hats are made. And that's what attracted my family to go there, because they knew that they wanted to do the Panama hat business. And they got there, they started organizing themselves September 1939. And from the very beginning, they managed to export already to their brother in New York. Because of the war, they could not export either to Europe or to Japan. So the first years of the business was basically exporting to the US. Some years later, the war ended, and they were able to, again, tap the markets of Europe and Japan. And the business started growing very fast. Now, curiously enough, there were 3 Jewish immigrants doing the same, because they were locals, also doing the Panama hat business. But this attracted to a British Jew who was in the British embassy in Quito, who also got into the business, and also another American person who started also the business. So there were 3 Jews doing Panama hats, and we are the only ones that remained. And now we are the largest company doing this. almost 80-something years old, the company, and still running with the same spirit that it began.
The one question I should have asked at the beginning is their Panama hats are made in Ecuador. How did the name Panama Hat come about?
Ecuador is in the Pacific coast, and Panama hats were sold to Europe through Panama. So they took the hats to Panama and they were exporting them from Panama to Europe, and that's how they got the name Panama hats.
Well, let's talk about weaving for a minute. As I mentioned in my introduction, UNESCO has declared the artisanal weaving at the heart of the Dorfzaun Panama hat as, quote, an intangible cultural heritage of humanity. Did UNESCO approach you about this? Tell us how that designation came about.
This was first, we tried to, this is something that is passed from children, from parents to children and grandchildren, even though, and so we wanted to preserve this thing, and we kind of were approached by UNESCO, and we approached them also to do this, and because this is something that it's unique, it's handmade. Each hat is really a piece of art, like in painting, because each weaver has a different hand than the next one, different, every hat is made different than the other one, even though they are similar, but each one is made out of a different plant, out of a different hand, and that makes it so unique. We wanted to preserve this because when Ecuador became industrialized, people rather worked in factories or doing some other work than weaving hats. So we really had to preserve this and preserve the trade, give value to the work of the people. One of the things that has been very important for us is that each of the weavers receives more than the minimum salary, all the health conditions, that any other worker, the minimum standards the workers should receive. And this is one of the things that we have fought the most as a firm, because if we don't keep these ethical standards, this trade would have already disappeared. So we want the weavers to have at least or more than the minimum income that a worker receives here.
So without going into too much detail, is the collection of the materials, the drying and the weaving, also part of a family tradition with those who make the hats?
Well, one of the reasons Ecuador is so unique is because of the location of Ecuador in the equator. And we have a lot more sun than any other place in the world. And this makes it possible to cut the stem of the straw dry. The reason the hat is so white is because of the sun. The sun bleaches the hat to be white. So everything comes together here in Ecuador to make possible to make the hats as they are. And it's, everything is done manually. The stems are cut manually. The straw is made manually. Then it's dried, sun dried, and then it's woven manually. Everything is manual. What we have done to improve this is that we have industrialized how to dye the straw. The straw is a natural fiber, and it's very difficult to dye. And we have created a variety of colors and put fashion into it. Also, we have all the processes we have done is to keep the natural process, but have the hat of standard of what the high fashion demands. And this is what we do.
Well, we talked about the workers, the artisans. and your view of or your relationship with them. And tell us a little bit more about their families, the vendors from whom you purchase the accessories, for example, ribbons and other accessories. This is must be over so many years, decades. And I'm sure that some of this is handed down family to family. Your relationship with these families really must be very close.
Yes, there are around 10,000 weavers that depend from us, that we buy from them, and we have a very close relationship with them. In the fashion world, family ties count very much. So we are, people, we're very close to the weavers, to their families, to their needs, and we try to maintain this close contact, not only to transmit the new fashions and the new things, but also to make sure that everybody's doing well. And I think the biggest example of this was during the pandemic. The first week of the pandemic, the whole world closed down. And for us, it was having 10,000 people not working. So what we did is we reached out to them, we reached to the government to ask for permission because nobody was allowed to leave their homes because of the pandemic. So we managed to reach them. We modernized the whole system. This used to be a very manual and person-to-person business, and through Zoom and through all these new techniques, we were able to reach out to everybody, to have their, in their homes, in the countryside, to have their cell phones. We transmitted the new fashions that we needed through pictures. We changed totally the payment system, which used to be cash, into electronic payments. So we could pay people what they had to, for their basic needs. And within a couple of months, the whole industry was changed from a totally manual, personal, person-to-person business to a really digital business in every sense. Since we start designing the hats until we make the payment. One of the things that we wanted to make sure is that everybody who works gets paid immediately, and because they depend, the weavers depend from what we paid for their livelihood, to buy goods and to do whatever they need to do. And now we do this very efficiently through the electronic means. And it's very interesting to see how an industry changed in like a month and a half completely.
Well, let's talk about the hats for a moment. You talked about changing styles, but what are some of the signature styles and the levels of design that are associated with the Dorfzaun hats?
We are in the high fashion world. And what we do is we periodically travel to see the new designs, the new trends, the new colors. And we try to not only follow, but to impose the fashion. One of the things that my father used, one of the dreams of my dad was that in terms of ecology is that you could eat a hat and not to use any unfriendly products for your health. And basically that is what we have done. I wouldn't advise people to eat our hats, but you could, because we only use now eco-friendly products. We process the water, we process the dyes that we use. Everything is eco-friendly now. And that's how we have been able to keep up with high fashion and to be a supplier to that. The ethical things also of payment of minimum salaries, social security, and no child labor, which we keep very, very, very strong standards to be able to comply with everything. So whoever buys a hat knows that whatever is behind the hat or whoever is paid decently, treated decently, and no child labor.
And you market all over the world?
All over the world, yes. Uh, our market, as the rest of the world, half of our market is always the US because of its size and of the market. But we export basically anywhere in the world, especially the design centers are our main buyers. It would be Italy and Germany and England, Japan, Singapore, all over the world, and China nowadays.
Well, you were once president of Ecuador's largest Jewish community, and you've lived in Ecuador. Tell us about the community. I know that in my visit, we had an opportunity to see a high school which was sponsored by the Jewish community. And I think we even went to the synagogue while I was there. Tell us a bit about the community and its activity.
The Jewish community was founded around the same time the immigrants arrived here, which was from 1938 to 1939. It was mostly a Central European a community with I would say we were Orthodox, conservative, and Reform at the same time. And we have remained one community like that since then. Most of the community were immigrants, I would say 100% at the beginning. And nowadays, most of these immigrants are not there anymore. So right now, the community has really changed from an immigrant community to a very different community, which is mostly composed of the descendants of the immigrants. There has been a lot of mixed marriage or integration, and the community has been very open and welcoming to the spouses of its members who have married Ecuadorian partners. And basically, nowadays, that is our community. It's more, we have all the services. We still have all the services a community can supply. Kosher food, we have a cemetery, we had a rabbi until a month ago, and we're in the process of hiring a new rabbi soon to continue Jewish life here. And it's not so vibrant as it used to be. I think we are 400 Jews now in Ecuador. And on a comparative basis, I think we are very active and comparable to the much larger communities because we still have all the services and everything is basically running. The school used to be, now it's only 8% Jewish kids, but it's, I think, the biggest contribution that the community has given to Ecuador is a world class standard high school. And this is, local people enjoy and take advantage of it and are very successful. The kids that pass through the Jewish community, the Jewish school, are well educated, and I think this has been a huge contribution to the country. I would say one of the biggest.
Now, of course, Ecuador is a big tourist destination. Ecuador, Galapagos Islands. Do you meet a lot of Jewish tourists who come through Quito for a vacation or a tour?
Yes, and we even there are people who give service to these tourists with kosher food, for example. We do. There is more and more Jewish groups that come and they have full advantage of having kosher food and all the services they need. And also we have a growing expat community of people who retire, come from the US mainly to retire here in Ecuador because of weather and costs and medical costs. And so it's a growing number of people who are retiring here. So they don't come to the community that much because they're in smaller towns. Usually they go there because of weather or economical reasons, but it's a growing expat community here.
Well, you can learn more about Kay Dorfzaun's renowned Panama hats and Alberto's remarkable family history at k-dorfzaun, dorfzaun.com. Alberto, really, it's been great talking with you. It's 84 years of K. Dorfzaun to another 84 years and beyond. It's been a real pleasure, and thank you again for being with us today.
Thank you. And I really was happy to tell our story. I was the third generation managing the business, and it survived. Now I have a nephew running the business, so it survived the third generation. So I hope that this 84 years that you wish us will come true. Yes.
We certainly hope so, and lots of luck, best of luck in all you do. Thank you again to my guest, Alberto Dorfzaun, for joining us, and to you for tuning into our podcast, Conversations with B'nai B'rith. We hope you enjoyed what you've heard. If you did, please leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and share this episode with friends and others. For all of our latest content, and if you haven't already, follow or subscribe to Conversations with B'nai B'rith wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and like us on Facebook. This is your host, Dan Mariaschin. Until next time, take care, everyone.